It began with a whisper, one that slipped past the palace gates and triggered a storm no one was prepared for. A single murmur, quietly spoken behind closed doors, would lead Prince William to uncover a truth so deeply buried that even his closest advisors were shaken. What could Meghan have done? And why did it involve Princess Charlotte? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The initial days were uneventful, at least on the surface. Within the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace, calm had returned after months of tension surrounding Harry and Meghan's public interviews. But the silence was deceptive. One morning, as William reviewed briefing notes for an upcoming appearance, a handwritten envelope appeared on his desk. No markings, no sender. Inside, a single line, "You've been kept in the dark about what she did to Charlotte." There was no signature, no date, just enough to chill the blood. Initially, William laughed it off as an obvious attempt to stir old tensions. Gossip wasn't new to the palace, it practically breathed the same air. But something about the phrasing gnawed at him. The idea that it involved Charlotte, his daughter, hit differently. He quietly passed the note to his personal aide, instructing them to discreetly trace its origin. Days passed without clarity, but the aide returned with a disturbing possibility. The note had been slipped through the palace's internal delivery system, used only by senior staff. Still, William wasn't one to act on paranoia. It could have been a hoax, another trap laid by those seeking to destabilize the monarchy from within. But then, he noticed something he hadn't before. Charlotte Bright, intuitive Charlotte, had started to change. Her voice, once confident in public settings, now faltered. Her posture stiffened during family gatherings. Her smile, though still there, no longer reached her eyes when certain names were mentioned. It was subtle, but William, ever the observant heir, saw it for what it was, a signal. He brought it up to Kate one evening in hushed tones, testing the waters gently. Her reaction was immediate, but cautious. She didn't dismiss his concern, but she didn't expand either. Instead, she urged him to let it go, just for now. That only deepened the pit in his stomach. If there was nothing to worry about, why the restraint? Why the fear behind her calm voice? The whisper had done its job. It had planted a seed of doubt that William could no longer ignore. And once that seed took root, everything began to unravel. He started to see patterns where he once saw routine. Faces looked different, words held weight. And as Charlotte's retreat into silence became more obvious, so too did the urgency to act. But what William believed was just another palace rumor was about to explode into a revelation that would redefine trust within the royal bloodline. The most terrifying thing for a parent isn't loud rebellion, it's silence. Charlotte, usually vibrant and articulate, became reserved and distant. What had once been innocent play turned into anxious glances, carefully chosen words, and a growing wall between daughter and father. William couldn't ignore it any longer. It started with the smallest shifts, barely perceptible at first. Charlotte, who once ran down the halls of Kensington with untamed laughter, had grown cautious. Her footsteps were quieter. Her eyes darted more often, scanning faces as though measuring each expression for safety. She no longer chimed in during mealtimes. She spoke less when guests were present. And, perhaps most telling of all, whenever Meghan entered the room, Charlotte would subtly retreat, not physically but emotionally. Her presence dimmed. William observed it in silence at first, doubting his own instincts. Was she simply growing up? Was this a phase? But the truth clawed at him every night as he watched his daughter choose solitude over family, quiet over joy. The realization that something deeper was unraveling beneath the surface came crashing down during an afternoon tea, where Charlotte, barely touching her food, responded to a light-hearted question from Kate with a rehearsed, almost robotic, "I'm fine." It wasn't her voice, it was a version of her that felt manufactured, taught, or worse, forced. Concerned, William pulled Kate aside. The conversation was brief but loaded. He asked if she had noticed Charlotte's shift. Kate nodded solemnly. She had been trying to work through it gently, hoping Charlotte would open up on her own terms, but as days turned into weeks, the distance only grew. Kate admitted that Meghan's presence seemed to trigger Charlotte's withdrawal more than anything else. There had been moments, small, sharp ones, where tension cut through the air between them, but Meghan had always dismissed it as a misunderstanding, claiming Charlotte was overly sensitive. The turning point came one morning in the nursery when Charlotte's longtime nanny, someone deeply trusted by the family, found her curled up in a corner of the room, holding a doll tightly against her chest. When gently asked what was wrong, Charlotte didn't cry or complain. She simply whispered, "It's a secret," and refused to say more. The words rang like a bell in the nanny's ears, heavy and foreboding. She relayed the moment to Kate, who in turn brought it to William. Neither parent could shake the weight of those words. Kate, usually composed and measured, began to unravel in private. She hinted that this might not be the first time Meghan had pushed boundaries. There had been subtle gestures, passive remarks, and moments of tension that Kate had previously let go for the sake of royal peace. But now, in the face of Charlotte's declining spirit, those dismissed moments took on a darker shade. The palace walls may have been thick, but William now saw clearly that something had pierced through them, something that had reached his daughter's heart and wrapped it in silence. The time for hesitation was over. Charlotte's silence was no longer something William could tolerate, so he turned inward, toward the one person who might finally break it all open. She kept it hidden not to deceive William, but to shield him from a truth too bitter to confront. Catherine, Princess of Wales, finally opens up about the moment she knew something had happened, and how long she'd tried to protect both Charlotte and the monarchy from the fallout. It had weighed on her shoulders for far too long. Kate had carried the burden in silence, believing that time would smooth over the incident, that Charlotte's resilience would overcome what had happened behind closed doors. But as the days stretched into weeks, and Charlotte's quiet retreat deepened, the moment she had buried refused to fade. In a private conversation marked by tension and fear, Kate finally confessed to William what she had witnessed that spring afternoon, an encounter that had never made it into the official schedules or royal reports. The event had been a simple rehearsal for a formal family gathering, one of those picture-perfect appearances choreographed down to the second. Charlotte, though young, had been practicing her curtsy, her walk, her greeting duties that came with the role she never asked for. Meghan was there too, meant to observe, possibly assist. But something shifted. Kate had stepped out briefly, only to return to find Charlotte standing frozen, tears brimming, as Meghan's voice sliced through the room. It wasn't yelling, but it was sharp, unmistakably angry. Charlotte had apparently missed a step, forgotten a gesture, and Meghan, according to Kate, had snapped. Not physically, but emotionally, with an intensity that left the young princess shaken. What made it worse was what followed. Charlotte, normally comforted easily, refused to speak for hours after the incident. She clung to Kate with a desperation she hadn't shown in years. That night, after putting Charlotte to bed, Kate confronted Meghan privately. The exchange was tense. Kate expressed concern, not accusation. But Meghan reportedly brushed it off, dismissing the moment as discipline and even remarking, "She needs to learn her place eventually." It wasn't just the words. It was the coldness, the distance, the total absence of remorse. Kate had wanted to tell William then. She had even written it down in a journal entry she never intended to show anyone. But she held back. For the sake of peace, for the stability of a family already cracking at the seams. The last thing she wanted was to add fuel to a fire that had already scorched public trust in the monarchy. And perhaps, deep down, she hoped Meghan would reflect, would change, would make amends in her own time. That hope now felt naive. Confessing this truth to William wasn't just an act of honesty, it was a breaking point. The weight of keeping it hidden had worn her down. She wasn't just protecting Charlotte anymore, she was protecting a lie. And watching her husband spiral into fear and fury without the full picture had become unbearable. Kate's voice trembled not out of guilt, but out of regret for waiting too long, for believing things might heal on their own, for failing to realize that silence had its cost. William was no longer just a father, he was a future king forced into a decision that could destroy either his family or the monarchy itself. Behind the closed doors of a forgotten palace wing, a confrontation played out that few knew about, but those who did would never forget. Now, for the first time, we piece together the events of that fateful day, and the implications are far darker than anyone imagined. It was meant to be a quiet afternoon, a closed rehearsal, far from the public eye, where the younger royals could prepare for a formal engagement without pressure. But instead of poise and polish, what unfolded behind those sealed walls was a collision of power, pride, and a child caught in the crossfire. Multiple staff members later came forward, some anonymously, others under immense discretion, describing an exchange that left even seasoned aides rattled. Their accounts aligned too precisely to ignore: raised voices, sharp tones, and one young princess left visibly shaken. Charlotte, in her small ceremonial attire, was prepari, ending her lines and curtsies under the supervision of her nanny and 2 event coordinators. Meghan arrived late, reportedly unannounced, insisting she had a right to observe. What began as suggestions quickly turned into commands. She allegedly told Charlotte to repeat her introduction several times, criticizing her tone and posture. According to more than one staff account, Charlotte stumbled over her words during a practice run, prompting Meghan to say, coldly, "You're not the Queen yet." The room froze. No one moved. No one dared speak. The atmosphere turned electric. Charlotte's eyes welled with tears, her hands trembling. One of the senior aides, a woman known for her fierce loyalty to both William and Kate, reportedly stepped forward in quiet protest, trying to defuse the moment. Meghan, unmoved, allegedly dismissed her with a wave, insisting Charlotte needed discipline, not indulgence. The aide later said she had never seen such a harsh tone used with any of the royal children. What followed was a breaking point. A favorite toy of Charlotte's, meant to soothe and comfort during rehearsals, was accidentally knocked from her hands during the confrontation. It shattered against the floor. Charlotte burst into tears, not from the toy, but from everything: the humiliation, the confusion, the weight of something she couldn't yet understand. The staff attempted to comfort her, but Meghan had already left the room, according to one footman's recollection, her expression unreadable. When William later demanded a full report of that day's events, what he received was incomplete, fragmented. Names were redacted, timelines conflicted. Some staff had already been reassigned or silenced by HR protocols. But the consistency of the remaining accounts, and Charlotte's own withdrawal in the aftermath, spoke volumes. Still, the final blow wasn't in what was written. It was in what wasn't. When William finally saw the security report from that day, it wasn't just what he read, it was what was missing that pushed him over the edge. There were cameras in the hallway. Cameras that should have shown everything. But when William asked for the footage, it was gone, deleted, erased, missing without explanation. Was this a technical error, or a cover-up orchestrated from within? The first sign that something was wrong came when William demanded a full breakdown of the day's surveillance. It was standard procedure. Every corridor within the working wings of the palace was under routine monitoring, especially the rehearsal wing, where public-facing engagements were prepped and protocol was sacrosanct. William had requested the footage not out of paranoia, but out of duty to verify the reports, to trace the chain of events, and perhaps more than anything, to hear his daughter's voice in a moment when she couldn't speak for herself. What he received instead was a blank screen and a half-hearted explanation. The official word from Palace 1T was malfunction, a corrupted file, system, unusual power fluctuations, and an unfortunate timing that just so happened to erase the window of footage between 2:20 and 3:05 p.m., the exact time Charlotte's breakdown was believed to have occurred. It was presented as technical coincidence, but for William, the timing was too precise to dismiss. This wasn't a glitch. It was a silence that screamed. He ordered a deeper audit, only to find that backup servers had failed the same day, their automated sync logs mysteriously blank. It was unprecedented and unexplainable. The only fragment recovered was audio, captured from a distant mic at the end of the hallway. It was faint but distinct. A muffled scream, small, high-pitched, unmistakably a child. Then a pause, then a door slamming hard enough to rattle its frame. No names, no clear context, but for a father already staring down a wall of silence, it was enough to ignite fury. William's quiet resolve shattered. Someone was hiding something, and the machinery of the palace built to protect the crown was now turning against the very people it claimed to serve. Behind the scenes, suspicion brewed. William began to quietly question who had access to the surveillance archives. His inquiries were met with polite deflection. One aide suddenly requested a transfer. Another went on indefinite leave. The deeper he pushed, the more resistance he encountered, not from the outside, but from within. And then the whispers started. Not in the press, but in the corridors, among trust, Ed's staff. A rumor that a soft deal had been brokered weeks earlier, allegedly between senior palace officials and Meghan's legal team. The details were elusive, but the goal was clear: avoid scandal, minimize risk, and preserve what little unity the monarchy had left in public view. It was a betrayal of unimaginable proportions. If the rumors were true, William had been maneuvered out of his own right to justice. If the rumors were false, then someone had crafted them to distract him. Either way, the effect was the same: his trust in the palace's inner circle had collapsed. Meghan, meanwhile, remained silent. No statements, no denials, no acknowledgement. It was the silence that cut deepest, not just from her, but from those he once believed would stand beside him unconditionally. If the footage was gone, then Meghan's silence became the only thing left standing between truth and chaos. No more whispers, no more silence. At a private meeting in Windsor, Prince William finally confronted Meghan Markle face to face. What began as a civil inquiry erupted into a moment that would fracture the royal family beyond repair. It was the meeting everyone hoped would never happen, not because it wasn't necessary, but because it was. The weight of days, weeks, and quiet suffering had built to a point of no return. William could no longer tolerate the shadows. He demanded clarity, truth, accountability, something that had eluded him since the very first whisper arrived. The meeting was Jed discreetly, in a secured Windsor wing, under the guise of routine royal business. Only 2 aides were present, trusted, silent observers. Meghan entered calmly, poised, unshaken. She knew why she was summoned, but she gave nothing away. William didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His silence was thunderous. Laid before him were the testimonies, staff reports, Kate's own confession, timelines, the audio, even Charlotte's unsettling change. He began reading them aloud, one after the other. His voice never cracked, but it pulsed with restrained fury. Meghan sat across from him, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. When he paused to allow her a response, she delivered it coolly. "This is unjust. You're feeding a narrative that was never true to begin with." William didn't blink. He continued. More accounts, more moments. He recounted Charlotte's behavior, Kate's emotional collapse, the missing footage. With each word, the room grew heavier. Finally, Meghan interrupted him, not with an apology, not with remorse, but with disdain. "And what will you do, banish me?" she asked. It wasn't a question. It was a provocation, a dare. And it struck William deeper than she could have imagined. This wasn't about titles anymore. It wasn't about royal image or press perception. It was about a father fighting for his daughter, and a man betrayed by someone who once claimed to be family. His hands clenched at his sides, betrayed what his words did not: the inner storm, the heartbreak, the disbelief. William, who had endured scandal, grief, and the collapse of traditions, now stood on the edge of something far more personal, something that couldn't be managed by press releases or photo ops. Before the meeting could conclude, Meghan stood. She didn't wait for permission. With one foot out the door, she turned to William and said, "Your daughter will be fine. She's stronger than you think." And just like that, she left, leaving behind a silence even louder than her words. William didn't follow. He sat in that room long after the door closed, surrounded by files, facts, and a pain that no crown could absolve. The aides said nothing. They didn't have to. They had witnessed a fracture, not between individuals, but between worlds. The unspoken truth hung in the air. This was the beginning of the end. The confrontation may have ended, But William's fury had only begun, and what he did next would shake the very foundations of royal protocol. He couldn't undo what happened, but he could make sure it never happened again. Prince William, future king, began a quiet campaign of restoration, not just of trust, but of legacy. Meghan might still wear a title, but the consequences were already unfolding. In the aftermath of Windsor, William did not rage publicly. He did not release statements or fan the flames in the press. Instead, he turned inward with calculated resolve. If the institution couldn't defend his daughter, then he would reshape it piece by piece. The first move was subtle. A senior advisor, known for her long-standing ties to Meghan, was reassigned to an overseas diplomatic mission. A private secretary who had often been seen acting as a conduit between Sussex staff and the palace was quietly let go. No headlines, no explanation. Just silence and movement. Behind palace walls, the shifts were unmistakable. Meghan and Harry's access to royal briefings, ceremonial rehearsals, and formal appearances began to shrink. Invitations still arrived, but with caveats. Accommodations were rearranged, schedules accidentally conflicted, and above all, Charlotte was never near them. Not at events, not in the press, not even in passing. William had redrawn the map of proximity. Every move was deliberate, every layer of separation a statement louder than words. In parallel, William turned towards Charlotte, not with pity, but with purpose. He began introducing her more intentionally into public royal life. School visits, charity engagements, small walkabouts where she was at his side, not as a passive child, but as a future leader. The message was, quiet but thunderous, she would not be broken, and she would not be hidden. If there had been an effort to silence her spirit, it had failed. Then came the second wave. A trusted aide who had served under William for over a decade leaked a single phrase to the media: increased security protocols for the Wales children. The statement, though brief, sent speculation into overdrive. What threat were they responding to? Why now? Was it internal or external? The palace refused to clarify, fueling more questions. Some believed it was linked to a general rise in security awareness. Others whispered it was connected to a deeper scandal, one still being managed from the shadows. As speculation brewed outside the gates, the royal family presented a portrait of calm. But those within the inner circle saw the shift clearly. William was no longer the reserved heir who played by centuries-old rules. He had crossed a line, and in doing so, he had redefined what protection meant inside the monarchy. Meghan's presence, though technically unchanged, was no longer central. Her appearances became rare, and when they did occur, they lacked the warmth that once softened public tension. The connection was severed and everyone felt it. And just when the dust was settling, an unexpected letter arrived, one that would reopen every wound William thought had begun to heal. A child's curiosity led to a discovery that reignited the royal firestorm. In a drawer tucked away in a Kensington guest room, Lotta found something that would break her heart and reopen William's rage. It was an ordinary morning, unremarkable by royal standards. The Wales children were playing while Kate oversaw household arrangements. Charlotte, wandering innocently, began exploring the guest quarters rooms rarely used, mostly quiet and undisturbed. She opened drawers, peeked inside cupboards, unaware that beneath neatly folded linens and unopened envelopes lay the ember of a still smouldering scandal. Tucked inside an old leather folder was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, slightly crumpled, and addressed to someone Charlotte didn't recognize. But the signature was clear. It was Meghan's. She couldn't have fully understood what she held, but the tone of the letter was unmistakable, sharp, firm, dismissive. She brought it to her mother, confused, unsure whether she had done something wrong. Kate took the paper from her and began reading. Her face turned ashen. The letter was addressed to a former aide, someone no longer within the palace, someone close to Meghan during the height of her royal duties. And within it was a passage that drained the colour from the room. Handling royal children firmly is the only way to prepare them. She'll thank me when she's queen if she ever makes it that far. The air shifted. Kate, horrified, immediately handed it to William. He read it silently at first, then again this time aloud, his voice cracking under the weight of restrained fury. There was no ambiguity, no possibility of misunderstanding. The handwriting was verified within hours. The aide, though unreachable, had once been suspected of helping clear unflattering staff memos about Meghan. Now it seemed those memos were never fabricated. They had simply been buried. For William, this wasn't just a message, it was a taunt. A line crossed with cruel precision. The woman who had stood in his home, smiled at his children, and insisted on her loyalty had, in writing, dismissed his daughter's future as conditional as something she might never reach. And she had done so not with concern, but with veiled threat. It wasn't only insulting, it was devastating. Charlotte watched her parents closely that day. She didn't fully grasp the magnitude, but she felt it, the weight, the silence, the fury hiding behind measured breaths. William didn't speak for a long time. When he finally did, his words were few but final. No more shielding, no more silence. His voice trembled not from uncertainty, but from the enormity of what had just been confirmed. The one thing he feared most had happened. It was never just an isolated event, it was a pattern, a mindset, a belief that his daughter's worth could be questioned, her place undermined, her legacy reshaped by someone who had never earned that power. With the final truth laid bare, William had no more decisions to make, only actions to take, and the next move would be the most public of all. What began as a private family fracture had become a national reckoning. Prince William now stood at a crossroads between royal legacy and personal loyalty. The monarchy demanded silence, but as a father he could no longer comply. The storm had reached its crescendo. The evidence was undeniable, the silence unsustainable, and the weight of protecting both institution and blood had finally tipped in favor of one. For months, William had played the part heir to the throne, custodian of tradition, a pillar of royal restraint. But now, in a move that shattered decades of protocol, he took to the microphone during a charity gala with dignitaries, press, and members of the public in attendance. In a brief but explosive moment, he deviated from the script. His voice steady yet laced with emotion, he spoke of betrayal not by enemies but from within. There are acts, he said, that no title, no bloodline, and no oath can justify. And when those acts harm the innocent, silence is not loyalty, it is complicity. The room froze. Cameras clicked. No names were spoken, but everyone knew. The comment detonated across the media. Analysts, insiders, and royal historians scrambled to decode the fallout. Meghan and Harry, predictably, did not remain silent. Within hours, a statement emerged from their office accusing the palace of weaponizing emotion and leveraging personal pain for institutional control. They called William's words emotional manipulation disguised as moral high ground. But for once, the public seemed divided not in allegiance, but in conscience. The question wasn't who was right, it was who had remained silent for too long. At the next public royal engagement, a remembrance ceremony long regarded as a show of unity, the fracture was visible. Meghan and Harry were absent. Camilla stood stiffly beside Charles. Kate, stoic, flanked William. But it was Charlotte who captured the nation's gaze. Dressed in deep navy, her hand grasped William's firmly. As they walked through the arch toward the crowd, William made a subtle but undeniable gesture. He gently guided Charlotte in front of him, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. It wasn't protocol, it was paternal. And in that one image, captured by every camera present, the monarchy's future spoke louder than its past. Some applauded, others were horrified. But all watched. Because this wasn't just about succession or scandal anymore. It was about a daughter who had been caught in a storm not of her making, and a father who had decided finally that love outweighed lineage. In living rooms across the country, debates raged. On talk shows, voices clashed. But one truth echoed louder than all the noise: the crown could not remain untouched by consequence. And so, the war behind palace walls continues, not of crowns and titles, but of truth, memory, and a father's love for his daughter. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.